infections in men and women, urinary tract infections, low blood
Sheila, are
sugar.
you ready to go?
I'm ready when you are.
All right.
Call your doctor right away if you have fever or
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call to order the February 19th meeting for Environmental Matters. And first up, is there a motion to approve the agenda? Oh, I'm sorry, roll call. For the record, all the members are present. Alderwoman Finlayson is joining us virtually. And now, is there an approval of the agenda?
Move we approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. And we have approval of the minutes from January 9th. Is there a motion for those minutes?
Move approval of the minutes from the January 9th meeting.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. First up is legislation R5424, which is FY 2025 changes in the position classifications and pay plan. I would like to just offer for the committee that we did, we postponed this at the last meeting, but we did take action on the first 3 amendments. There are an additional 4 amendments that are posted, and I'm happy to discuss them in this committee, but I did want to offer to the rest of the committee that the remaining amendments aren't really germane to environmental matters, and so I think I would be fine if the committee wanted to move on just what we already spoke about at the last meeting. But if you also want to discuss the remaining amendments, we could do that as well. So what's the general feeling of the rest of the committee? Alderwoman?
Well, yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The 7th Amendment is impacting finance, not necessarily environmental issues, but I think so much of OEM deals with environmental issues. I think it would be appropriate that we take that one up, if not the others.
Okay. Any thoughts from Alderman Arnett?
Well, my general thought is this is what happens when we sign these things to all the committees that are not really supposed to be getting it. This is supposed to only be going to rules, but I'm fine with taking up 7 and then moving on. Rules, we'll get to the others when we meet in the beginning of March.
Okay, I'm good with that as well. I guess Alderwoman Finlayson, is there a motion to move amendment number 7 for discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that we give a favorable recommendation to Amendment 7.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion?
Well, I would, if I might, last year we had extensive discussions about the deputy position in OEM and the misclassification. And part of that was also where that position fell on the pay range. And so this amendment corrects the error. It should have been moved to 17. And so this amendment to 18. It was moved to 17. It should be on 18 as a deputy. And so this amendment corrects that.
All right, is there any other discussion? Sounds good to me. So we've got a motion that's seconded. All those in favor of a favorable recommendation for Amendment 7, please say aye.
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 All right, motion carries.
Thank you,
Aye.
gentlemen.
Is there a motion on the legislation as recommended in the previous Environmental Matters Committee meeting, which would be, I believe we recommended amendments 1 through 3 and now 7, and we did not take any action, please note, on the other amendments from this committee. Was
Mr.
there?
Chair, may I
Yes.
ask- I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt them.
Oh, go ahead. It's
did we take a favorable recommendation for 1, 2, and 3?
Yes. With, I believe you dissented on a few of them.
But as a committee, we took,
Yes, that's correct.
I just want to understand. So, we need a motion to give a favorable recommendation with amendments 1, 2, 3, and 7?
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay, I'll make that motion then.
Second?
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. All right, I think that dispenses with that piece of legislation. Thank you, staff, for letting us get through that. Next up is general discussion. Oh. Okay, so next up is general discussion. We have ID 3325, which is tree canopy update. Mr. Adams, will you please join us at the table and state your name for the record.
Brian Adams, urban forester, planning and zoning.
So thank you for joining us. I wanted to make sure both you and Public Works were invited today, since there is going to be, as we discussed last year, we had the forest program grouped into the Watershed Restoration Fund, and so that fund now supports your program. So it would be good to get updates from both programs at the same time. So
Great. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I know you guys have a full agenda. Try to move through it quickly.
Your mic?
Said, thank you for inviting me. I know you have a full agenda. I'll try to move through it fairly quickly. So I wanted to start with just some outreach that I've been doing over the last, I don't know, however, this fiscal year. So one of the things we released was this community engagement map, and you guys may have seen it. There was a press release. There's been some articles in local newspapers. And essentially what it is, because we had this new analysis of our canopy done, we're able, as well as the tree inventory, we're able to make that data available to the public. So we've set up a link on my urban forestry website that enables residents to log on, or not even log on, just visit the URL, and they're able to look at a lot of the data that was acquired. There's different geographies. It's broken down by census, by watershed, by ward. And so they're able to look at, where we stand, our current canopy, where we were the last time. I guess it was, I think this covers 2013 to 2024. And then it also enables them to look at our tree inventory, which is just street trees, really, and park trees that we maintain. And they're able to look at those and get species information, size information. So I'm really happy that we were able to do that. I think it's a great tool for the community to see where we are and get engaged. I've been trying to do some things on social media. I've improved the website, put a lot more on it, a lot more content. And one of the big things I had done was this, that you see on the screen, is this, just a 2-page fact sheet, which really sort of summarizes our canopy. So and I sent this to you guys, it might have been a couple hours ago. I sent this over to you just to maybe take a chance to review it. But, actually it was 2011 that it was, the gap was 2011 to 2023. I'm sorry. So this just really sort of highlights a lot of the information, the more important information. It's got our total land area. It's got our current canopy of as of 2023, where we were in 2011. And then they also look at open space, plantable space, which I've used now to sort of look at how do we achieve our goal. And so right now our canopy cover is about 43%, which I'm actually happy with, because as of the last study and the lack of funding for this program, I was afraid that we may have lost acreage. But the existing canopy we have that continues to grow is really making up for what we're losing. So there was a small change in canopy, which was a small increase over that time period. So you guys can read through this later, but I just wanted to hit some of the maps. This first one sort of gives you a good visual of where our canopy exists. The darker green being the higher density, and the yellowish being the lower density. And so you can see that a lot of our canopy is focused in Ward 2 and some of the wards towards the south. And the map to the right shows the decrease from 2011 to 23. So while Ward 2 has the greatest canopy cover, they're also losing the most. And I think you can attribute a lot of that to the backyard tree removals that we're seeing.
Sorry, could you say that last part again?
I said I think you could attribute a lot of that to like the backyard tree removals, you know, the non-permit requirement. In addition to age, because a lot of the trees in West Annapolis specifically are reaching like that 80, 100 year time frame, and a lot of them are failing, and it's mostly tulip poplar. So we're seeing a lot of mortality in that area.
You know if those are getting replaced in West Annapolis?
Only if they fall within our conservation area or critical area, of course, you know, the 100-foot buffer. So the second page I had them calculate our annual ecosystem benefits that our canopy is providing, and the numbers they speak for themselves, right? Our trees are a huge benefit to the city of Annapolis. They're doing a lot for us, and you can see the numbers there. One of the comment to the left that was interesting to me, in that only 7% of our canopy shades impervious surfaces, meaning that we have a lot of room for improvement as far as trees planted along streets, parking lots, sidewalks, etc. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. And then the one I know you guys want to see is by ward, right? So Ward 3 being our lowest, and a lot of that is because of the design district and all the impervious surface we have over there. It's a difficult area to plant trees. But the other wards, except, you know, and then again, Ward 1, right? There's a lot of impervious surface in Ward 1. So that just breaks it out by ward. And there's some other figures that they've listed on the right. You guys have any questions about that stuff?
Questions from the committee on this?
And I will mention again that while it's not included here, just analyzing that that analysis, by far the largest portion of loss is coming on residential property. It makes up 80% of the loss of canopy.
If the Alderman, I see your hand.
I have two different questions. One is about carbon sequestration. I heard somewhere, and I want to see the validity of this, that new plantings actually have the biggest potential carbon sequestration because the trees are going to grow bigger and therefore take in more carbon, whereas existing trees have pretty much reached their full potential.
No. I mean, the largest trees are absorbing the most amount of carbon. And so those new trees actually take quite a while before they're really making a difference in sequestering carbon. So, you know, by far, retaining existing canopy is the best way to increase our ecosystem benefits. Yeah.
Thank you. That takes care of that misinformation. The other thing is, you and I have spoken often about amending the legislation to require replacement trees for backyard. And we're getting a lot of specimen trees actually cut down in Ward 8. And actually have a candidate to cut down in my own yard because it's growing up against my neighbor's garage. But we don't have any requirement for replacement right now. And I think we could stop a lot of this loss. We would just amend the code and make the same tree replacement requirements all across the city.
I would suggest, I know you had tried that a couple years ago and it didn't go through, but I would suggest just focusing on the critical area at least. I think that's a reasonable goal, is that, any tree of a certain size, even if you wanted to go that way within the 1,000-foot critical area, would require a permanent replacement. I think that's really a reasonable approach.
So in Ward 8 on the peninsula, we just had all of the gas and water lines replaced and the sidewalks replaced. I have to say, as an aside to DPW, it's so much nicer to shovel the sidewalk without the up and down. So that was very appreciated in the last big snowstorm. But it occurs to me that we have a little bit of margin between the curb and the sidewalk. And then in my case, a little bit of margin between the sidewalk and a low wall in my front yard. Really seems like we might want to pull the sidewalks all the way out to the curb. That would allow people to get out of their cars without bumping into trees, but leave a space on the inside of the curb, still in the 6-foot portion, where trees or other vegetation could be productively planted. Right now, about a 17-inch space between sidewalk and curb at the street, about a foot space between sidewalk and front wall. And it almost seems like we need a policy to pull sidewalks out to the curb and leave planting space in the rest of the, forget what we call that 6-foot right-of-way, I guess.
The right of way.
Yeah. So for future replacements, we ought to rethink about how we locate the sidewalks, make more room back further towards the front lawn, tree planting.
That way, yeah, that way or the other way, and pulling sidewalks a little closer to the home to provide a better planting strip, one or the other.
Yeah, well, the problem with the trees at the curb is when you're parking at the curb,
Yeah.
so opening the door, you have to jockey around the trees, whereas if we made it at the back end of the 6-foot right-of-way,
Sure.
the sidewalk would still be there, and people could get in and out of their cars, but there would be room, tree planting in the front of the. Just a thought. Maybe we can put that in our list. Which time is running out to submit new legislation?
Alderwoman Finlayson, I can't see you, so if you have something you wanted to ask, please feel free just to speak up and interrupt us.
I will, thank you. There was a lot of static. Madeline has fixed that, but I didn't realize you couldn't see me, so I'll just yell out.
Okay, yeah, they're working on it. Thank you. Did you have any questions?
No, I just,
Okay.
Mr. Adams, sending this information ahead of time, so thank you.
So I had a couple comments, Mr. Adams, but thank you for putting this together. It's a great summary. I think you haven't already, it'd be good to go through our PIO just to get this put out there
Yep.
to the community. And I also, like I said, I noticed the loss in West Annapolis, and we'll need to keep that in mind because I think that really does speak to the need to have some kind of backyard tree policy or expansion, I should say. And I think the image showing the different wards is also helpful to see, and I do think we should try to aim for some equity between the wards as far as canopy coverage. I know Alderman Pindell Charles has been strong advocate trying to get that emphasized in Ward 3, but that also links to one of the comments I have, which is just ensuring that, really taking a look at some of the large parking lots and also some of the wide roadways that we have to where we can potentially add trees. And I know that's going to require a relaxation of some of the parking requirements, but I really think we have a lot of potential as some of us revisit the parking policies. A good opportunity to work in some of the canopy expansion. Because I was looking at the website you sent, the other one with the mapping information. It's I looked at my ward, the giant shopping center, but that's treated all as one parcel. So I think to some degree it might be worthwhile to zoom in on some of these other lots that have large parking lots, large impervious surface, to identify them as, well, I guess like we did in the comp plan, identify them as environmental opportunity areas, but maybe get a separate map showing some of those from Mr. Lashinsky, showing some of those could do potential conversion from parking lot. I think there's a lot of potential there.
Mhm.
And as far as roadways, I did have one ask for you. If you have an opportunity, if you'd be willing to look at I'm not entirely sure we have this, but in plan and zoning, if we have the complete streets policy, that's one thing. One thing I'm working on introducing at some point would be strengthening our complete streets policy, but that's also an opportunity to add trees. We saw it a lot when we were over looking at some of the European cities where they have completely implemented a road diet, reduced the size of some of their streets, which opened up opportunities to install brand new street trees. I just think, we're looking at currently Tyler Avenue for potential reconstruction. Next on the list, I believe, is Edgewood Road. And so those both may have opportunities for adding trees. And I think it'll be important to have overlap make sure we're not too siloed in our departments, to make sure, if you haven't seen those plans yet, it might be a good idea to check with Public Works to see if you can make sure those get considered.
Public Works or DPZ?
Public Works is the one.
Complete streets?
Well, P&Z has complete streets, I
Okay.
believe, but Public Works is the one leading the
Those,
street
okay, gotcha.
reconstruction. I'm not sure if they quite raised the level of reconstruction, but yeah, I think those are the two main streets, Tyler and Edgewood.
Mr. Chair, I do have a
Oh, yeah.
question.
Yes, madam. Yes,
Um,
madam. Miss Alderman. Alderman Finlayson, go ahead.
Question, you raised the issue of the CIP. Smithville Street is in the CIP. So may I ask, Adams, is there an opportunity to weigh in on those projects, such as Smithville Street, to encourage the increase of trees in those projects?
I'm not aware of them, but I'd be happy to be involved or consulted on ways that we could, incorporate street trees. Absolutely.
I think it would be very helpful if we could look at those CIP projects and weigh in on them while they're in the planning stages to increase our benefit.
Noted.
And I did have another question, Mr. Chair, that goes back to really the first slide about us losing 4 acres. If I read that correctly.
No, we gained a few acres.
So we gained some in 21403, but we lost in 21401. Right? That's like the last slide. So my question is, what caused that? Was it development? Was it just an opportunity to evaluate all the impervious surfaces that we have? Is there something we could be doing differently so that we're not continuing to decline?
I don't know specifically by zip code, but again, like, development obviously it is contributing to our decrease. But I believe that the tree removals in backyards or unpermitted tree removals are the bulk of our loss, where the bulk of our loss is coming from. But
Okay.
while we lost in some wards or some areas of the city, we gained quite a bit in others. And I have a full breakdown by different geographies of who lost what and who gained what. I didn't put that in this presentation, but we actually gained a net increase. We gained 2 acres over that time period.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So before we move on to your next section, Mr. Adams, I know you have more. Does the video studio bring up those pictures that I sent them? I just wanted to show, because I've been thinking about, like, as far as where we can add the trees, and I've been working on a separate project on transit, but you'll see some of these old pictures. On the left is from top of Main Street, but on the left is from like 1910 or so. But one of the things that stood out to me, besides the trolley, was just the clear trees. We had so many more trees at that top of Main Street. So it makes me wonder if we do have more potential than we realize on some of our streets to add.
Main Street's a great, I don't know if you recall, but I acquired a grant through the Green Streets, Green Towns, Green Jobs some years ago and put together, a green infrastructure plan for Main Street. And it included stormwater management, bioretention areas, but it includes street trees as well. And that plan was shot down so quickly because there was a reduction in parking spaces. And it wasn't by much. But this was pre-COVID, and look at how many we lost during COVID, and they still functioned. So I'd love to revisit that, because it did. It had street trees down Main Street, and not tree lined, but it had a significant number, especially down at the bottom around that where the sidewalk is quite wide. I wonder too in these pictures how much narrower the street may have been. I don't know if we've expanded it. Maybe not. Maybe they did squeeze them in, but I would love to increase the number of street trees on Main Street. I think it's needed. I think, that is a really hot street to walk down in the summer. And I think if we had shade trees running down that, it would increase the appeal for residents, for tourists. It would, it encourage people to hang out under the trees. It would increase business for businesses. I think it's a win-win. But I guess it's getting the political will to potentially lose some parking spaces.
Yeah, and that's, we did add a significant number of spots in the new garage, but it also speaks to the need to have alternatives from automobiles, because it would really allow us to do a lot more, install a lot more things that would be benefit to the locals.
Yeah, that concept plan, the green infrastructure concept plan, it would be great to bring that back and look into pursuing some of that, because one of the reasons it was also put off and not pursued any further was there was the re-bricking of Main Street, which I still haven't seen happen, but that was one of the big issues with pursuing it, was like, well, we're going to re-brick the whole thing anyway. Let's not move any further on this.
Well, and that's going back to the complete streets. That's one of the things the state just adopted, a complete streets policy, took effect with the new year. So whenever there's work on state street, they have to look at, even the jurisdictions who do work have to look at the complete streets idea, which again is an opportunity to add trees. Could the studio show the next photo?
Before you leave that, do we go back?
Okay, I guess go back for a sec. Alderman
Did you
Arnett?
underline down indicating you wanted to change the flow of traffic down?
That wasn't intentional. Next, but yes, this one also, again, just showing a large tree canopy we had 100 years ago
Hmm.
on West Street. Yeah, you can see the shade even in that photo. All right, thank you for, you can take the photos down now. Thank you. So Mr. Adams, I know you had more to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next question is, what are we doing to increase canopy? We, as a result of your legislation, the urban forestry program was funded at a level we've never seen. So I've spent, this year trying to implement the use of that money. So one of the things we've done is we've increased the maintenance budget for our, existing trees. And it's something that's needed to be done for a long time. We're sort of playing catch up because there's been a lot of work that's been postponed and put off. So we're doing that, but then we're also working towards a proactive management approach where we can get to a point where we've dealt with all the reactive emergency type things, and now we can start, systematically addressing trees and keeping, providing. It keeps the trees healthy overall. It prolongs their life. It's the gold standard for management of street trees in the industry, and there's a number of municipalities that are doing it that way. The next thing we did the community canopy tree giveaway in the fall. That was a very popular event with residents. We provided 150 trees. They were gone in like 3 days. And people showed up at the pickup asking for more and wanting any that were left over that may not have been picked up. So I think we'll increase that number next year. And those were decent sized trees. They were 6 to 8 foot tall trees in 5-gallon buckets. Replant Annapolis, which you're familiar with, continued to work through the fall. And we've renewed their contract and increased the funding from $30,000 to $50,000 this year. And they're also adding a new program, which is called Groves of Gratitude. It was part of their Arundel, Replant Arundel. Yeah, Replant Arundel for the county. And that basically is another opportunity for residents to request trees. It's groves, so it's groupings of trees, and they can request them based on different outcomes like edible trees, oak groves, pollinator. So we're going to include that this year. Another thing I started with Chesapeake Bay Trust was they had this Anne Arundel County Community Tree Planting Mini Grant Program. And I worked with them to add the city of Annapolis to that. In the past, the city was not, the city was excluded from that grant program. So I have contributed $30,000 this year to that. So the city is now included. And those are awards for communities. It's up to $5,000. All of those projects come to me for review before approving. And we've gotten one application for Maryland Hall. They're planning a new green space, including like 20 new trees between the street there and then their open area. So that's the first application we've received. And then speaking of grants, we also, as you're aware, this doesn't completely tie in urban forestry, but I think it's related, is that we were able to take that critical area fee and lieu money from the city dock, and we are working with DPW. They had an MOU with the trust for the watershed restoration grant program. So we've included $500,000 in that program this year, and we're really looking at critical area resiliency projects, living shorelines, impervious conversion. So I think those are hopefully grants that will, in addition to stormwater management, increase our canopy because they're really, interrelated. So now now the bad news. So looking at, with this new analysis, I was able to better, sort of dial in on what we need to accomplish our 50 by 50 goal. Essentially, we need to increase by 298 acres of tree canopy. We gained 2 from 2011 to 2023. And that works out to about 18,000 trees. That doesn't take into account the growth of the current trees because they don't have a good way to estimate that. But if you figure that over the last approximately 10 years, we've sort of remained equal, we've remained about the same. So with the loss from development, with the loss from unpermitted tree removals, we've sort of remained the same. Now, if we're able to pass legislation to include backyard trees, that would go a long way in helping to keep what we have. But that, that again ties it. So our total potential planting area, and again, this doesn't take into account land use. These are just open areas of turf. So it doesn't include, the rec and parks properties that they want to keep open for leisure, for soccer games and et cetera. And it doesn't take into account utility right-of-ways that we can't plant on, but there's 790 acres approximately. And so if we need about 300, that's a significant amount of what we currently have open. Very significant. So going back to your comments, Alderman Savage, we would need to get creative with how we are increasing the canopy and trying to get trees planted over current impervious surface. That's really where we're going to need to make a lot of progress. I put together an updated budget sheet. I know I presented this last year. And so what I did was I extended it out a few years just because looking at the numbers last year, it just seemed completely unreasonable. I've had some communications with other municipalities that have tree planting programs, and I'm finding that the max that they're achieving on a good year is 1,000 trees a year. And those are robust programs. So I think previously on my budget sheet, we were up to 5,000 a year, which I think is just completely unrealistic. Even in this scenario, we get up to 3,000 at a max, which I still think is incredibly difficult to achieve. In reality, we may not make these, we probably won't make these numbers, but if we're working towards that goal of 18,750 over time, and we get those trees in before 2050, we do know that those trees are going to mature and eventually we will reach our 50%. So I've broken that down year by year. It gets really expensive, as you can see. Oh, you don't see it. Can you put it? I thought you guys were seeing that. This I did send to you earlier as well.
Mr. Adams, this was one of your, correct? Is that what we're looking at?
I'm sorry, what is that?
I said this was one of the attachments? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
So the top is our 50 by 50 goal. The second one I put in there just because, and I give you some background. So the 330-300 rule, if you haven't heard about it, is fairly new in the industry, but I believe it is the way this industry, the green industry, the urban forestry industry is trending. And what it means is 3 trees visible from any home, work, or school, 30% tree canopy at the neighborhood level, so not as a city, but at the neighborhood level, and 300 meters or about 1,000 feet from the nearest green space. So this is a new way of looking at urban greening. It's got it's very much research backed. There's been a lot of studies done, mostly on the 30 and the 300. The three mature trees within site was, he admitted that he kind of added that so that it would ring, 330, 300. But the 30% canopy, there's been a number of studies done in which when you reach that point, you really start to see the eco benefits and improvements in health. And so, and looking at that on the neighborhood level has an equity, is looking at it through an equity lens, because you may have a city with 50%, but if half of that is in one part of the city and the other half is low, so this provides 30% at the neighborhood level, really spreads that out. And then the distance from a green park, that's a World Health Organization recommendation, which is that residents should be about a 5 to 10 minute walk from the nearest green space. So I wanted to include that because I did the analysis, and if we break our city down by census block, if we were to achieve 30% per census block, this is the number that we would need to reach 6,500 trees. So that would be very much targeted at very small, at the neighborhood level, essentially. And it obviously, as you can see at the bottom, is a much more reasonable budget over time. I realize our goal is 50% by 2050, but I just wanted to put that in there so you guys could see those numbers. And just to put in perspective the number of trees, last year we gave away 150. The city planted about 75, and then through the grants we planted another 100. So we're just about meeting that 250 that we had targeted for FY 2025. But next year, according to this, we're expected to double that, which I find to be, until these grant programs have really been advertised and passed around and more people know about them, it's going to be difficult to obtain those numbers. One of the other things I'll mention is that as part of the inventory, I had them evaluate potential street tree sites. So areas where we have a little bit of a tree lawn, where we don't have trees, and they've come up with about 1,000 potential sites. So I'm sort of in the process of field truthing those and making sure they're actually viable. And so my next step is going to be to reach out to the aldermen in certain wards and try to start planting some trees in those areas this spring. It gets to the issue of preferences where, some residents prefer not to have trees, and I don't want to come in heavy-handed and say we're just going to plant our right-of-way. It hasn't worked well in the past, so it's about outreach and engagement and trying to get them on board. You show someone without trees a tree-lined street, I would think that most people would want that for their community, but something we're going to work on.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. I see, Alderwoman Finlayson.
Oh, are you seeing me?
Yes, we
Yep.
see you now.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Mr. Adams, there is a Annapolis Walk Park.
Yep.
And it's not a park, it's a field. And for several years now, the mayor and I have been trying to develop that into a real park, which should have trees. Would that be a good opportunity? And I welcome you in to give us ideas on how we can turn that area into a real park setting with trees and other amenities. But it just seems to me like a great place to plant several trees, many trees. Have you looked at it, or are you waiting for an invitation from me, in which case you just got it?
Well, they're redoing the parking there. And so I'm working with DPW. We've met about it, and there's a number of trees along the edges that they have to take out and replace. And I've actually requested that they, increase the number of trees they're planting. So my intent, and I would be willing to kick in funding as well, is to plant the entire perimeter of that park. As far as the interior, I guess, I wasn't clear in the past whether the community wanted that as an open space. I assumed, maybe incorrectly, that the community liked that open, for kids, for recreation. But if that's not the case, I mean, I would be happy to work on a plan to put trees throughout that park.
Well, the idea was to create an actual park setting, not to take away from the play space. We have a playground at one end, we have a horseshoe pit and volleyball net area in one area. At the far end is like a soccer field, not defined, but is used. The community, and a very small faction in the community, wanted the whole park taken out and wanted parking. And we answered that by giving more parking, by turning the parking from parallel parking to pull-in parking, which means we will only lose 3 feet on each side. So there would still be more than ample space to create an actual park-like setting. So I would welcome a plan from you on how to do that. Not taking away the soccer space at the other end, but more midfield that could be used, creating an actual park setting.
Are you working with a consultant or a designer to look at how to create, different facilities and park amenities?
Well, the mayor came up with a rendition that I still have. He probably does too. And I don't know whether I have that electronically or not, but I know I have it on a big board in my garage. But I don't know, and maybe Miss Johnson, because she's been part of the discussion with the mayor about how to do this area. And so I don't know to what extent or to what level she has brought in consultants to advise. But I know, and she and the mayor very recently both mentioned wanting to get moving on that area very soon.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to reach out to Director Johnson.
Okay.
Start that conversation.
Absolutely. And is there an opportunity in the Kingsport community? I know some of their property under conservation easement. But there's a walking path really that goes from Kingsport all the way to the Safeway. Might there be some other opportunities? And in Kingsport, we have the Bywater Kingsport Park there.
Mm-hmm.
And deliberately did not put a lot of trees in that area because we were public safety as a concern, but there may be another opportunity there.
So Bywater, I met with Rec and Parks about that location a year or so ago because I saw it as a potential for planting, and they said they want to keep what's open. So there may be a few spaces along the edge, but for the most part, they want that to remain an open field. As far as Kingsport, I have a good relationship with their HOA. So one of the things I've started to do is reach out to HOAs about the programs we offer and try to engage them in maybe coming up with, sites within their communities where they can plant trees. And I think as these new programs are advertised and more people in the community find out about them, I really hope that we'll get a lot more interest from communities that want to plant free trees. How can you beat that? Um,
And one last thing. There is a big open field now on Aris Allen Boulevard
mhm.
that is supposed to be developed into a housing development, and that doesn't seem to be moving forward. And so there's some discussions, and I think I see the back of Director Kubiak's head, an opportunity for some discussion about that property, as I'll just say that property. So maybe another opportunity in Ward 4. So keep that in the back of your mind, please.
Will do.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep, you're welcome. Alderman Arnett, do you have any questions or comments?
I do like the more realistic aspect of the 330, 300 rule, especially what's happening to budgets nationally, state, and I'm sure it's going to trickle down to us. Trickle down finally does work, but not in the right way. So I think that's a much more realistic looking financial goal. And as you said, seems like a stretch getting 250, doubling it to 500. We better be putting our money and our staff where our mouths are. So I think this is a very helpful chart, and I think
I will say I did the calculations. If we were to pursue the 30% by census block, it would bring our total coverage to about 46%. So, we would gain about 3% citywide.
strong on keeping the 50 goal, but you have to yield to reality. And so I think this second block of data are much more real and not going to be an easy reach itself.
Yeah, it's still a number. It's still quite a few. It's still quite a bit. It's not an easy lift.
Yeah, and I think we don't yet know exactly what the reality is, which is why this is really, in my mind, the start of a conversation. We're going to have you back, and also Public Works, because the forestry program, I think, we should have been tied with the watershed fund. I'm glad we've done that, because that's our very reason for increasing tree canopy, is to address those ecosystem services that you tried to quantify, right? As far as the water filtration, but also the creation of shade and cooling the water, which helps the water quality. So all those things are for the same reasons, but I think we need to, I think my one, I guess, request is if you could dig into some of the ecosystem services to compare your existing with how much would we gain in ecosystem services by achieving 50%, right? Because that will help us really understand that, okay, maybe this does cost more than we anticipated, but there are actual benefits and cost savings to the city, right?
I think the EPA says that for every dollar spent on tree canopy, you are returned 5. Just as a general rule.
And I think again, in the last budget, and I'll bring this up with Public Works as well, but we did fund a couple of improvements, a couple of changes that needed to be worked on with the Watershed Restoration Fund in order to help it become hopefully more equitable, right? Idea with moving towards the ERU, equivalent residential unit model, is because you can potentially make it more equitable. Larger properties with a larger impervious surface will be paying more. There are also other tools we can use to make the feed be more equitable. I mean, you've sites like the Navy Stadium only paying $5,000 in a stormwater fee for their entire property, right? Probably the same thing for something like the Giant Shopping Center or the Growls, right? That's not paying enough in my mind for the pollution their sites are causing. So there are a number of tools we can use, including perhaps, and one of the things again we funded was to link our BMP database with the Watershed Fund, so that we can then go ahead and look to say, well, these properties that have zero stormwater management, maybe we escalate their fee. So my point is, I think there's still a lot of work we need to do before we determine exactly what is feasible or not. But for me, we've adopted this goal. I think we need to give it and that was the whole idea, is it's something that's easily digestible, understandable by the public. I like the idea of the 333, but it's going to be a bit more harder to just explain to people, right? But I also think since we adopted it in the comp plan, we should give it a good effort. And so to that end, I think you have the ramp up it's gentle for the first few years, I've noticed, but I do want to make sure with our next conversation that that's being incorporated into the watershed fund. And I think that's so. Yeah, again, the overlap, because I think with the connection with the fee, I think that if we do figure out ways to be creative with the stormwater fee and the credit program, which I think we'll hear a bit more about, is that we can then go to your office could then go to some of these property owners that have large asphalt impervious surface and say to them, look, we can give you a break on the stormwater fee if you convert some of these parking spots to tree wells.
Yeah,
Along
it
those
would be
lines.
great to have an incentive to approach
Yeah.
them with. Yeah.
That's what I think we need to. So there are a lot of pieces we still need to work on, I think. Synergy between the programs and moving in the direction that we want to go, including, like I mentioned, adjusting some of the parking requirements to give people an out if they add a environmental community benefit. So in any case, that I think is all I have. I want to thank you for taking the time to put all this together. Anything else from the committee for Mr. Adams? All right, hearing none. I want to thank you, Mr. Adams, for joining us again. And
Thank you.
to invite Public Works up, we have ID 4025, stormwater fee discussion.
I'm trying to pull up your presentation. I'll give you this.
Am I going to have access to the presentation?
We haven't seen it yet. I checked earlier. It wasn't posted.
Okay, I can see it on the screen.
Okay. Ready to go? You guys hear me? Is on.
Please introduce yourselves for the record.
So I'll speak loudly, I guess, until Mike Rosberg. I'm the Stormwater Program Manager in Public Works. And like the agenda says, we're here today to talk about the stormwater fee structure and have a discussion. I wanted to first mention, I believe we forwarded the committee the City of Annapolis Annual Watershed Report for FY24 prior to this meeting for your review. This is per code, we're required to provide this report, and it is broken down per how it's spelled out in the code. I'll quickly kind of go through it. I
Mr.
think
Rosberg, could you send that again? Because I haven't
Okay.
seen that.
I will after this, I will forward it to everyone. I'll just quickly kind of go through it. I think we want to talk the discussion about Stantec's presentation here. it first goes over all of our planned and current and completed projects that were a part of that used funds from the Watershed Restoration Fund. It goes under all the Watershed Restoration Fund revenues and goes over the current fee structure with the 4 tiers. And then it goes into the Restoration Fund expenditures, and then the staffing overview, followed by external funding sources. I will, yeah. And so I believe this is the first report that I was a part of in providing to everyone. Happily take feedback and comments as far as for next year's report, any questions on the content in the report. So again, it was the first report I was part of, so happy to take feedback, and I will send it to you here shortly.
And Mr. Ross, is this a draft report or is it the final Stantec?
This is the final report for FY24.
For FY24.
Yeah,
So reporting on the previous year's fiscal year.
right. So, and that, again, yeah, and that's kind of, I think, what we want, depending on when, at what time of year, when it's desired to have this report, based on, we want that feedback too, so we can prepare to make sure that the report's at the time that you guys want to review it.
Yeah, because I think what we told I'm blanking on her last name. What we told Betsy's last year is that it'd be good to have it some report prior to the budget, because this is what we use to anticipate and determine what level to set the fees at, right, in the upcoming budget. And so there have been some years, in the past, we typically get it rather late after the budget's introduced. So earlier, better.
Okay, we'll look into when we will have this data and getting it to you prior to the budget discussion. So I figured that was just when we had it and what we had. So okay, and like I said, there's a lot of other content in there. So any other questions related to the projects or any other work in there, happy to answer questions. So moving on, I'll kind of introduce David. He's with Stantec. He's works with us with all the different rate structures throughout every utility, and prepared. We did not provide this to you, but we know that it's been talked about and requested to be worked on again prior to me really being much closer involved. But it's a good presentations for us to keep this conversation and discussion started. So I'll just let David take it over.
All right. Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. Dave Heider with Stantec. Before I jump into the presentation, I did want to mention that we are currently engaged to look at fiscal year 26 in terms of the needs of the stormwater system. And so historically, what we've done is we work with budget, and there'll be a presentation to the Finance Committee in the coming weeks where we look at what the needs are. And so perhaps we can provide some information in parallel associated with that process.
That's for the fiscal year 26.
Correct. Yes. All right. So I do have a brief presentation I wanted to take you through that looks just at the stormwater fee structure, as the chairman alluded to earlier, potentially changing the structure in terms of how you currently charge for non-residential parcels. So in terms of the agenda, I just want to talk about the evolution, where you've been, how the stormwater fee structure has changed over time. We'll talk about some of the modifications, and then what the impacts and some kind of considerations would be moving forward. So first off, I think as everybody's pretty well aware that the basis for stormwater fees is to use impervious area. Impervious area is the greatest indicator of potential runoff from a property. And so the closer you can align that stormwater charge or the stormwater fee to the amount of impervious area on a parcel, the more equitable the stormwater fee is going to be. And so that's really the goal. We want to align that fee with the impervious area on the parcels.
Can
Yes.
I stop you there?
Go ahead, Hold on.
So I looked at this earlier, and I've been thinking about this a lot vis-à-vis our comprehensive plan, which has an emphasis on more density, development along the main corridors and so forth. And every time I think about that, I think more and more impervious surface. Buildings filling out the lot, tall buildings. And I worry about this diagram here, and I particularly as we drive to the slot on the far right here, it feels like, in a way, our comprehensive plan vis-a-vis stormwater and the environment is driving us in the wrong direction. So I hope we're going to have some notions about how we ameliorate the planned increased density. Maybe trees, more trees would be one of the things, Brian, but this depiction is something that feels like we have some conflicting goals in the way we're planning the future development of the city. I just wanted to make note of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do think one of the opportunities would be credits, as we've talked about, the potential to offer reductions to the stormwater fee if you implement green practices, which could help as you have that density to install, whether it be green roofs or trees or pervious pavement, things of that sort. Okay, so if we go back to 2020, this is what your stormwater fee structure looked like. So for residential parcels, both single family and multifamily, they all paid per ERU. So each single family home was treated as one equivalent residential unit. So they paid $15.30 per quarter. And if you were a multifamily, per unit, so if you were 10 units in an apartment complex, you essentially, each of those units paid the exact same as a single family home, was treated as one ERU. Non-residential properties were billed within 3 tiers based on their impervious area. So if you were tier 1, 0 to 5,000 square feet, you were basically 4 ERUs, $61. If you were 5,000 to 10,000, you're 8. And then if you're over 10,000 square feet, you were essentially capped at 13 ERUs. So you could have 100,000 square feet of impervious, you'd still only pay for 13 ERUs.
And this is a quarterly fee, or is this?
These are quarterly. Yep. So then in 2021, the fee structure was changed, and this is the current fee structure as it stands today. To address the inequity in the residential and multifamily stormwater fees, single families remained at 1 ERU, and the current fee as it stands today is $30.83 per quarter. Multifamily were charged a half an ERU because analysis was done to look at the number of units in comparison to the impervious area within multifamily, and essentially the average came out to be about half an ERU per unit. So each unit in multifamily pays $15.42 currently. And then the non-residential tiers were expanded, so we added basically an additional tier, which went up to over 80,000 square feet. The number of ERUs per tier were aligned with the midpoint of each of the tiers to try to provide some equity between the single family and the non-residential. And so you can see the current fees, it's the same if you're 1 ERU, if you're in tier 1, you're at the midpoint, you're at $30.83. And then somebody with 80,000 square feet or more is about 2,000 square feet. I'm sorry, $2,000 per quarter. And what we've talked about in the past would be to change the rate structure, the fee structure again. And what we're proposing is to maintain the fee structure for residential customers, residential properties. So single family and multifamily would stay the same. But when it comes to non-residential, they would be charged based upon the measured impervious area as multiples of ERUs. And so an ERU is 2,500 square feet. That's the median impervious area on a single family home. And so if you're 10 ERUs, you're 25,000 square feet of impervious, you'd pay 10 times the $30.83. And that would essentially remove the cap. It would remove the tier so that people would be charged equivalent to a single family home for the amount of impervious area they have on their parcels. These numbers, as they're shown here, are the current fees for 2025. We are in the process of evaluating the needs of the stormwater system to determine whether additional fee increases would be needed in fiscal year 26.
It would be good, do you have in this presentation, or it'd be it'd be good to be able to look and compare with some of the, the previous structures you have for the non-residential. Be able to compare what the change would be. For example, when you have what would a tier 3 tier? I know you're proposing to move away from the tiers, but it'd be good to at least see some of the numbers to compare. So a site with 40,000 square feet, what would it pay under the previous model versus the new model, just so we can really
Yeah.
get a good handle on that.
Those that are within, kind of fall within the 0 to 80,000 square feet wouldn't see much of a change because essentially the ERUs in those tiers are based on the midpoint. So if you're towards the edge of a tier on the upper end, you'd see an increase. If you're on the lower end, you could actually see a decrease. But we have run the numbers on every single non-residential parcel so we can show what the change is under the current fee structure and what it would be under the proposed alternative. And I do have some numbers here in a minute.
And just to clarify, the ERU you have here is equal to 2,500 square feet.
Correct.
And is that the same as what the county ERUs are, or is it?
The county ERU, I think, is pretty precise. It's 29,304 square feet, I think. So their median impervious area is a little bit bigger on a single-family home than the cities.
That makes sense. Having just driven around part of the county, the yards tend to be bigger.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
So just to kind of drive home the point, the way this would work, pretty straightforward, but for property owners with more impervious area, they would pay more because essentially they're not limited by the tiers. And so the fee would be based on those multiples of ERUs. So in the example here, if you've got 20,000 square feet of roof, 5,000 square feet of parking lot, you're essentially 25,000 square feet of impervious. That would equate to 10 ERUs. The 10 ERUs would be then multiplied by the charge per ERU to give you your stormwater bill. So when we apply this to the current charges as it stands today, in fiscal year 25 from non-residential parcels, we're estimating you're going to get about $900,000 in total revenue from the watershed fund. If you were to change to the alternative fee structure in 2025, keeping everything else the same, we estimate you'd generate about $1 million. So there'd be about a $100,000 increase as a result of the change. This is keeping everything constant. Again, if we do this in 2026 and there's also a fee increase, obviously the revenue increase would be more. But this is just keeping everything neutral at this point. And what this looks like in terms of this chart just shows the number of properties that would see either a bill reduction or a bill increase under the change. This is taking all the non-residential parcels, comparing their current quarterly bill to what their quarterly bill would be after the change of going to an ERU-based approach. You can see there'd actually be about 243 that would see a reduction. There's about 524 that would see an increase of anywhere from $0 to $200 per quarter. 25 that would go from between $200 and $400, and then we go all the way to the end. You do have some parcels that would see rather large increases, above $2,000 or more per quarter. And these are parcels that obviously have really, really significant impervious area.
This is for the non-residential.
Correct. Yep. And so just to wrap up, some considerations and things to think about. So the transition to a measured ERU approach for non-residential properties would improve the alignment between the use of the system and the stormwater bill. As I mentioned before, you essentially have a cap. If you have a very significant amount of impervious area, you're limited in terms of what you pay because of the tiers. But the bill impacts would be wide-ranging. You could have some that would actually see reductions, and there's a few parcels that would see really significant increases, particularly those that have a lot of impervious area. The one strong recommendation we would have is that if the structure is adopted, that you take some time to proactively reach out to these affected parcels to let them know what's coming, make sure there's a mechanism that they can question what they're being charged, some type of appeals process. Because as you get more precise in terms of the measurements, they're no longer in those tiers. There's more likely going to be challenges in terms of the actual impervious area measurements.
Questions from the committee? Yes.
Yeah, no,
Alderman
I think
Arnett's hand.
that I like the equity notion that I'm hearing here. But for the large people, who's doing that outreach? And people with larger parcels tend to be people with more persuasion. So equity sounds good to me. It might not sound good to somebody who has a large shopping center in the middle of town. So I guess I'm asking more from the city, who's going to do this outreach to explain it to them? And I think we saw from your previous slide, there's going to be at least 7 people, 7 big properties that are going to take some.
Mike Rosberg, I think as we're looking at these numbers and doing this research, that's definitely, I think, one of the next steps that we're going to have to figure out how to do outreach. I mean, this is, it's going to take time and persuasion, yes. And I just think this first, couple months with this position, I think it's been talked about and this kind of been kicked down the road a little bit, but I think at least my goal coming out of this, want to get actual dates and see how long we're going to need to do this and what it's going to take. Keep kind of working towards this updated system, but that's definitely one of the major steps that we got to do.
Alderwoman Finlayson, I can't see you any longer, so did want to check in with you to see if you had any questions.
I had my hand up, so thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, my question is there a way to kind of level that out? And I'll pull it up on I don't have that on my screen. Those people who would go between 0 and 200, 500, I think is what it said. I've lost, can't see that.
524.
And then we go down to 3 or 7 or whatever. My first question was going to be, what kind of outreach, what kind of explanation are we going to be able to give to justify this? But then I'm thinking, is there a way to level out that impact? And are these all quarterly increases?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last portion of the question.
I said, is that too many questions at one time?
We'd have to give it some time. It'd be difficult to level it out because as soon as you do that, you're essentially stepping back in terms of the goals of trying to provide that equity, because these, essentially, you'd have to try to put some type of cap on the large parcels to make sure that they don't see as much of an increase. So essentially that's what we did last time, is when we went to the 4 tiers, that was one of the considerations, is how do we make this more gradual, which that did. But we can give it some thought. Can't think of anything right off the top of my head that would maintain the equity of going to the ERU approach, but limit those increases. One of the things to consider, which was mentioned by the chairman earlier, is I think the city is considering, and we're looking at potentially offering credits. And to the extent that, let's say it's a really big parcel that has over 80,000 square feet of impervious, if they actually are currently managing stormwater on their site through BMPs and things of that sort, you could offer credits that would then reduce them closer to what they're currently paying, would be one way to address that. But in terms of the timing, how quickly you can get that credit program up and running before they would see the bill increases would be one of the questions. That makes sense.
It makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
I would like for us to have that credit process in place, though,
Mm-hmm.
at the time we roll this out. I think that's the fairest way. If we're going to come up with that credit plan proposal, that we have that right from the start. And these are quarterly increases, correct?
Yes, these are the quarterly amounts. Yep. Yep.
So,
Or
I'm
business
sorry.
increased by $8,000 a year.
So I think we agreed that,
Could you introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, yes, Ann, I was about to do it, but I was just going to
Okay.
agree first. So Ann Roeder, Stormwater Engineer, DPW. We definitely are agreeing that it would be wise to do outreach, and as part of that outreach, to consider implementing a credit program. All of these property owners are already paying stormwater fees, so we don't need to do that initial outreach, but we need to make a significant effort to explain the changes, which might include a map so that people can see their properties and what their impervious areas are, but more specifically to look at different credit programs. So just as a little background, I was a campus architect at Johns Hopkins when Baltimore City enacted their stormwater fee, and our institution was the guinea pig for this measured approach to stormwater fees. And our response to that was to create a stormwater management master plan that implemented lots of BMPs. And then it worked with the city over a couple of years to make that plan, to put that plan in place. And I was on the Baltimore City Stormwater Advisory Committee as part of that rollout process. It was a big process. Baltimore is bigger than Annapolis, but it's not something to take lightly, particularly given the percentage and sum of changes for the major institutional properties that we're talking about here. Those smaller ones, the ranges that you mentioned, the 0 to 200 change? 200. Actually, 50% of those stay at 0. So that's easy. So that's half of those done. But the other half, we will have to consider ways to incentivize them or appease them, give them opportunities to find reductions. The county has a stormwater credit program. Baltimore City certainly has a stormwater credit program. Most major municipalities that have these fee structures, Philadelphia, Arlington, they all have credit programs. So that would be something that we would want to look at as part of the rollout, so that we're not just slapping on an extra fee without an opportunity to manage stormwater.
Well, I'm to hear that you bring kind of experience with you. And I'm afraid we're going to have to rely very heavily on you in helping us to create our plan and our credit system. So thank you.
All right, thank you. And I did have a few comments as well. And I want to clarify as far as when this change could be made, because we did, add some budget amendments last fiscal year to make this change, like I alluded to earlier. So, but if it's something we may want to phase in over a course of a fiscal year, that I think could be a viable way forward as well, if you need more time to do outreach. But I would like to see the change, because I think my colleagues can attest to the fact that this shift has been recommended by Stantec for probably at least the past 5 years, if not more, and the city hasn't made the full change. We've made improvements over the years, but I think last year really hit the point where we really wanted to do what needed to be done to make this full shift. So is this something that we can at least begin to implement for the next fiscal year? Are we at a point where we can do that?
From our perspective, working with staff, we do have the matching. We have all the parcels identified. I guess the key question would be, if we get this into the billing system and it goes into effect beginning of next fiscal year, seems like there'd be enough time to have a credit program that could kind of piggyback on that. That would be the only caution I would have if we want to make sure that credit program is up and ready to run. Typically, the way these credit programs work, like in Baltimore and other communities, is it's not automatic. You don't get the credits. You do have to actually apply. So you come in, you fill an application. You know, if it's a really significant credit, you may have to have a professional engineer certify that you actually have these BMPs and that you're managing stormwater on your site because of the magnitude of the credit that you'd be receiving. So there would be some procedural aspects that would have to be set up. But assuming that's the case, you know, from our perspective, I think you could implement it beginning fiscal year 26.
Well, and we'll get to the credit more in a little bit, but
Mhm.
because my understanding was that we needed to make some, I guess, improvements to our GIS system, or at least some of the data to make this doable. So have those changes been made to our system?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we are, okay, at least so we're technologically,
Mm-hmm.
we're capable of making that change right now. It sounds like we just have to make, so in addition to some of the programmatic improvements like the credit, I think the other part, linking back to Mr. Adams' comments, presentation, are I think we need to really quantify the ecosystem, not just services, but the ecoservices cost, right? As far as when we do the outreach, you know, X property, you have, I don't know, 2 acres of impervious surface with 0 stormwater management. Here's the impact as far as cost to our water, our water quality, right? Our creeks, because that is a cost. This is how much it's going to cost for us to restore the outfalls, or stabilize the outfalls, to do the stream restoration, do whatever improvements we need to make, right? Those are the things, because I think once we actually see those numbers, I was going to say it's my suspicion, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be a matter of fact. The fees that they pay are nowhere near covering the cost of the restoration activities that we end up having to perform. And so I think we were really way undervaluing that. So I think that should really be a part of our outreach sense, right? We need to explain that for the council, but also to the public who.
But this could be a huge win-win, and I'm glad Mr. Meekins is here and he can carry it back to planning and zoning. But what is the incentive? The incentive is, if you don't want to pay big fees, reduce your impervious surface. You and I have talked about going to, say, the giant shopping center, saying, dig up half of your impervious surface and make it into a rain garden, or even consistent with the comp plan, if you reduce the size, or we reduce the parking requirements for you, we can give you credits for building portable housing or mixed-use housing on some portion of your existing impervious surface. So actually having a nice big fee could be a real incentive to do better planning. Say, you know, we never see half of your parking lot full, ever. Maybe sometimes when we're plowing snow up in a corner or something like that. So we need to do some re-examining through the planning system about the parking we're requiring. And maybe we're causing them to have this extra impervious surface that they wouldn't have if we didn't have requirements. I'm not saying that's the case, but I bet you an amount of money, they have no strong desire to have empty impervious space that they're now paying a stiffer fee for. So we could really work together and get some development in a direction we would like to do. So fee may be a good thing.
Yeah. My suspicion is that a lot of these properties have been underpaying.
But overpaid.
Compared to
They might be overpaid.
They're overpaid. Yeah, well, that's another thing. I mean, there are a couple of different analyses that I think would be helpful to see. One would be, and this again ties in with the tree canopy, is that doing some kind of analysis of parking lots, parking spaces, because I suspect there are some properties that have more parking than are actually needed, right? An analysis that would actually look at surface parking, but also nearby parking assets. Then we can determine, well, this lot has ample nearby parking. They have a lot of street parking. They have a lot of parking garage. They don't need it on site. Let's figure out a way to get them to convert that to stormwater management or trees, right?
Yeah, put in a row of trees between each of the parking banks.
So is that something that analysis as well as like taking a closer look as far as are they underpaying versus the impact? Is that something we can get at some point?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the only thing that comes to mind as we're discussing this is that, yes, these fees can increase and based off if we do this new ERU system, I do think that, I've been to a couple conferences within the Chesapeake region that in other I think it was Howard County, where the cost to implement stormwater is also pretty expensive. So, it's sure even with these increased rates, the outreach is important and giving options, because even if we do outreach, say your fees will increase as a result, even if you offer a credit program and install BMPs, that installation and what's required to install that could be, you might not get that credit back for 10 years down the road, maybe. So it's just another thing to think about. I think it's going to take some outreach and think, but I think we can definitely, I know through our grant program, even nonprofits are working with communities, more residential, but you still get the cost of based off like this amount of impervious required this amount of stormwater to treat. So we do have numbers and data that we can use to kind of get some more, data and feedback for the credit program and the fee structure.
Yeah, and did you have? Okay, and I think for Alderwoman Finlayson, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Going back to what Alderman Net alluded to, I would hope that we don't implement these increases and then say, and by the way, you can do some things to ameliorate that increase. That we would have that additional opportunity, whether it's through credits or, whatever we decide to do, that we have that in place prior to, so that they do have an opportunity to address the stormwater issue. And they can decide on whether it's, more costly for them to just pay the fee or more advantageous for them to pay the fee or to do something to avoid having the increases in fees. So, all that, we should have something in place before we impose these fees, I believe. And we give them opportunities to address the issues in advance, not after the fact. Thank you.
That's a great point, Alderwoman.
I think
Do you have,
by having us examine, you've talked about this in other venues too, examining our parking requirements. So if we're requiring these people to have this big impervious surface, it doesn't seem fair. I think that's what Alderman Finlayson is alluding to. It's not fair to require it and then charge them for it. So we need to do some upfront work to see whether we really need to have these requirements. And when we back them off, say, we're reducing this requirement, you can now go to Mr. Adams, plant a row of trees, or you can work with the comp plan and the planning staff, think about some mixed-use development on part of your lot that will not get rid of the impervious surface, but it will bring in a revenue-generating prospect to the property owner, where they're renting or leasing
in the city,
the impervious surface and generating some income, so it's worth paying the impervious fee. So, I think there's a lot of positive incentives here that could work very well with our overall planning process.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about the mixed use in that. Yeah, perhaps that could in some ways be a credit for installing that, could be used as an incentive to get more of that development. See what you're saying. But I do want to ask a bit more about the credit, but first, just to point out, I think over the course of the next year, it'd be good to come up with a plan to, because again, something I mentioned earlier was potentially yes, increasing the fee that gets assessed on properties that have zero BMPs, zero stormwater management. You know, we have a number of these lots, again, like the Giant, stock of apartments, zero, they predate our stormwater management laws. And so, but they're still paying the same amount per square footage than those who actually do have BMPs, unless they're getting some kind of a credit, right? I don't know how much of those use the credit and that's keeping pace, but I think that'd be good. And that it might be too much to throw into fee changes this next fiscal year, but I think beyond that, if we come up with a plan and some analysis as far as, how many properties have BMPs, how many don't, compare some of the fees that are getting charged and figure out how we can maybe, I've even thought of some having like a escalating fee for these properties as some kind of incentive to get them to make the improvements we want to see, which is reducing the impervious surface. So I don't know if that's done elsewhere. Those are the kind of things I'd like to work towards.
Sure, I can just offer a little bit of perspective. Generally, the industry standard approach is that everybody pays the same per square foot of impervious. And then if you do mitigate that, your runoff through BMPs or whatever it would be, you'd get a credit, and that's how you'd be reduced. The only examples that I've seen are a little bit different than that, is you can have, some intensity of development or some runoff quality factor that comes into play. So if you've got runoff off of a gas station compared to runoff off of a, something without the same type of use, you could have a more intense or more expensive stormwater fee per square foot of impervious. But I'm not sure from a legal perspective that you could charge more to get somebody to take action. I think the general approach would be, this is what it is. If you want to mitigate it, you can by putting in these BMPs. You could do because of the development requirements. I have seen communities that have different levels of fees. If you've developed since this point in time, when we did have the requirements for these certain BMPs, your stormwater fee is a little bit less, things of that sort. But all of it kind of gets to the initial premise that we're starting from scratch. It costs what it costs per square foot of impervious. And then if you are managing your impervious, you get a credit. It's kind of the industry standard approach that I've seen, if that makes sense, versus trying to quantify and charge somebody more because you want them to take a certain action. And that's where it gets a little bit, from a legal perspective, I think you could be challenged potentially, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can see your point. But I guess if all that logic, it would be most effective then just to, I think, figure out a way to increase the fees even more on some of these high, especially I guess that would be the non-residential properties. Increase it quite a bit more, but you'd have to have the robust credit program and proactively probably reach out to these properties who have BMPs to say, look, we're going to increase your fee significantly, so you may want to apply for these credits, right? Because I think that would help level out some of the.
It would. The only caution there is it does need, it's an enterprise fund, so obviously it has to be cost based. So if the cost of running the stormwater system is $5 million, I know there's a lot of costs that aren't currently borne. So, but that's a good point.
Yeah, though. You're right. It is, but I also think now that we've added the forestry program, I think we need to add in some of those external. I don't even know, consider them external, but some of the ecosystem services, the costs, not the services, the costs that are associated with those impervious surfaces. I know we tie the fee directly to a lot of the management of the stormwater infrastructure, traditional infrastructure, not necessarily the costs of the stream restoration or outfall restoration. I'm not sure.
Yep.
But yeah, so I think that's got to be factored. So any other information on the fee? Do you have? I think we only have 15 minutes. Do you have anything you could offer on the fee? We could also, I suppose, wait till the next meeting to get into some of these details.
That was all we had today, and I appreciate the discussion. This was great, I think. So happy to come back next time and with more data and maybe some more plans and dates and actions of what we can do to get forward to this moving.
Yes, and please add to the list the credit program. I think we do. There's some interest on the committee. Find out what the current credit program is, and then any kind of proposed changes. Good to know. And I guess the other question might be for Stantec. For the report you're preparing, I guess, for the Finance Committee for the upcoming fiscal year, as far as, again, projecting the enterprise costs, have you factored in the forest program costs that Mr. Adams shared?
Not at this point, unless it's in the budget, and that's something we can talk about in terms of
Well, that's
what those
that's the
costs
point. It
were.
was adopted in the comp plan. That goal was adopted, so the costs that he outlined are the ones that we essentially, we want to meet that goal, we have to factor that in. So I think that needs to be looked at if we're serious about this. This
Yep.
is how much it's going to cost. And so I think he said next year it's going to be what, 500 some $1,000 increase from 350 I think thousand for this current fiscal year. And so again, that entire program cost is looped into that, so it's got to be treated as part of the enterprise fund.
Yeah. At this point, we've been given the fiscal year 26 estimated budget, and I don't know that it includes those costs, but we'll make a note to make sure we at least run that as a scenario, what they would be with it in, and to demonstrate what it would look like.
Yeah,
515,000.
yeah, 515,000. Yes, thank you. Be good to see.
Yeah.
I don't think I have anything else. Anybody else from the committee
For this or
for on this topic?
No, but I think there's some exciting planning prospects here that we could use this very effectively. I think the start is make sure we're not requiring them to have more parking than they need to have. We're the bad guys then, but if in fact they have excess parking, they can pay these higher fees, or we can give them incentives to put more trees or put more mixed use, and we can work on the rules for mixed use. Mixed use keeps the impervious surface essentially the same, but they get the revenue from that new development, so there's an incentive for them to do that. I think this is actually pretty interesting coalescing of a number of ideas.
Yes, and so for next meeting, and I guess this, if you could send the report to us, Stantec report.
Yes.
And
I
so
will
we
do
can,
that.
I guess if we have questions, we can bring those up at the next meeting. Does that include, that's for, you said fiscal year 24, not 25?
Yeah, it was just a summary, very brief summary report based on what's in the ordinance, I believe, in terms of, so we, on an annual basis, we do what we typically call a revenue sufficiency analysis for the Watershed Enterprise Fund. And that's what you've probably seen in the past, where we look at, the cost of providing service and then what the forecast would be going forward for the stormwater fee and a recommendation. Last year, Betsy reached out and asked if we could do a summary report to meet what's the requirement in the ordinance, and that just essentially talks about what capital projects have been completed, the spending, the revenue on the system, and then any grants that have been received.
Okay.
And so that's what Mike was alluding to, that we've prepared for fiscal year 24.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Good to see. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I really only have one question on the update.
Mr. Meekins?
For planning, I know resiliency is next, but if there's not a lot of questions for Mr. Meekins, maybe we could do that quickly.
Well, I would like to apologize to Ms. Guile, but I would like to give Mr. Meekins, since he doesn't often come,
I agree.
and because we only have about 10 minutes, I guess. So yes, to the committee members, if there are any, well, first, Mr. Meekins, welcome. If you could introduce yourself and if you had any information you wanted to present to us before we start.
No, thank you. It's been an interesting afternoon. I appreciate you having me. My name is Mike Meekins. I'm a senior planner in current planning. And I got asked by the director late last week to put together or update the current project lists before you. I have hard copies, and I know I've emailed them. I guess my only question is, does Alderwoman Finlayson have a digital copy that she can look at in front of her?
Mr. Meekins, did you send it to my email?
Yeah, I don't know what the. I haven't known.
So
Earlier today it was
I
not up there either.
will send it right now.
Okay.
If those could get sent in the future, and this is by no means just I'm not targeting you, Mr. Meekins, just in general, I think we really need to get those reports a day before. Because, you know,
A lot of us actually look at the materials before the meeting.
well, yeah, and the night before is often my only time to do it.
Alderman Savage, I completely understand. And yeah, in the future, if I'm going to be involved in doing this, it will be before you, days before, not minutes before.
I know you were, I think, roped into this on short notice, so
Yeah.
certainly I'm not directing that towards you, but thank you.
No offense taken. But so I don't know how you'd like me to proceed given the time. I can run through the broad brush overview of this, or if you have a specific question or a project that you would like to ask me about, I will do my best to answer.
Well, so yeah, so since we're short on time, let me just say this. In the future, typically what we've done is, we focus on, it looks like you may have done this, but highlight some of the projects that have had changes as far as environmental processes, reviews that have been updated since the last meeting. But sometimes, like a colleague here will have questions about specific project statuses.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know Alderman Arnett, you've
So I just
Got a
got
question?
an email from former Public Works Director Pat Moore about Grissom Square, and it has been unsightly for a long time. I understand that they ran into some problems with that's right at the corner of Tyler and Bay Ridge, and the pipes weren't where they thought they were, so it's been postponed. Mr. Patmore seemed to think that was just a staging area to store supplies for some other project, but it's not. All those pipes are there. But do we have any idea when that project is going to get going?
So I don't have a specific date. I drive by that site multiple times a day, and I could editorialize on why those pipes are there, but in the effort of time, I did reach out to Public Works to see where they were in the process, and like you articulated, there was an issue with the routing of I believe the storm drain outfall. So they had to re-engineer that. I believe, it's my understanding, that is complete, and they are working with the MOT, motion of traffic, basically a traffic control plan. They're in the process of reworking that in order to eventually break ground, because as you know, it's a very congested intersection, and there's a lot of logic that needs to happen prior to moving forward. So that's as far as I know. Date-wise, I have no timeline, but I think it is still in, the pipeline.
Summer of 2 years ago, brand new director, Mr. Vogel, reached out to me. As it happened, my sister was with me. We were up in Maine, and he wanted to know, did we want them to do that work only at night and keep it all tied up for over a week, or do 3 days of really intensive work, which would be a big traffic snarl. And I don't know what the ultimate decision is going to be, but it seems like that was summer of 2 years ago.
Sure.
We ought to be ready to do something.
Yeah, it was my understanding that there was pushback from the community with night work, because it did happen to fall in the summertime, and you possibly would have windows open and so on.
Well, and that's one, so that project in particular, good example of, I would love to, since you're now chief of planning, future comprehensive planning, right? No. Current planning.
Senior planner and current planning.
So current planning is that that development pattern is not ideal. What's currently proposed, I believe, are a bunch of single-family homes.
Well,
So yeah, and believe they got. I think they predated our MPDU changes, so they got around that law for the time being.
Yeah, so there are 12 units, and yeah, this subdivision dates back probably close to 15 to 20 years.
It's one of the zombie permits that we've.
Correct. There were 2 MPDUs that were a part of the project. Those actually were constructed, and that was phase 1.
Oh, I know.
And they were modular homes. They're the first 2 modular homes as you head out of town on Bay Ridge
That was
Avenue
like
on
2
the
years
left-hand
ago,
side.
Probably.
Yeah. Second phase is what we're talking about right now.
Well, I guess my point is, if there's any opportunity to revisit the overall design, I think that'd definitely be a good thing. Because we've, as Alderman Chandemeyer's pointed out, the single-family development is often a cost the city more than it brings in as far as away from that.
Understood.
But the other thing with the abandoned house on the corner,
Yes.
spoke with Mr. Manasseh a couple weeks back, and I know they're waiting on getting that demolished while they change ownership to talk with the new owner about it. But my fear is that I don't know how long that process is going to take to change ownership, and it could be how many months while we have this structure that is derelict and most likely violating our code. Is so, my point is I'd like to get that removed sooner rather than later. If you just relay that and keep that in mind as far as when we might be able to get the new owner to remove that.
Understood that abandoned, well, I'll call it abandoned house. Actually, not that specific house, but another house that's had fire damage in a community nearby has just come up in a topic that we talked about literally this morning.
Oh, okay.
So, and that's a code enforcement issue as well. And not to cut you off, but I'm looking at Alderwoman Finlayson, and she's been raising her hand.
Thank you. I sometimes don't notice. Alderwoman Finlayson.
Thank you. Mr. Meekins, good seeing you again. 3 of the 4 last items on the list, the first of which is Rocky Gorge. I understand that the transfer or the sale has not been forthcoming. And so is there any thoughts? We'll just leave it there. Any thoughts about moving forward? Or is that a dead project?
I don't believe it's a dead project. There I know was a potential second developer that was interested. I don't know at this point if they have walked away. I think at this point, from a current planning standpoint, we're open to basically anything, inclusive of some sort of redesign or some of the permits with that project are active or, have not expired. When it comes to the grading permit, that will have to be reapplied for and re-reviewed. So that's really as much as I know regarding that project. But we're more than open to hearing any input and suggestions from you or any of the council or community.
Well, I would like to get together with you and Mr. Jakubiak, because I do have some ideas. And I have reached out to some other partners of mine who have some ideas on how we might be able to move forward with that. So I'll be back in touch with you about that. The Willows, do we have a date? I know they're coming along. All the approvals have been made, so is there a due date when that's going to be completed?
Yeah, I don't have a completion date for the Willows. Obviously, it's under construction. We've had several inquiries from different contractors, and with the installation, BGE lighting and tree placement and so on. So that's it's an active construction site, and I can certainly look into an anticipated completion date, and but I think that's a little ways off at this point.
I've had questions from the community, and I've been saying it's probably going to be a year out. What we see looks like almost finished product, but we know there's an awful lot more that goes into it beyond what we can see.
Yeah.
Anything that you can provide, but I'm not trying to rush it. And then the last, of course, is Providence Point. Are we still in appeals mode, or is anything moving?
So with Providence Point, I believe there is still an outstanding appeal on issues with Forest Conservation Act. I do, and that is in the I believe either the Circuit Court or Court of Appeals. I don't know where that stands with respect to communications with the developer. We have periodic status meetings. We have not had one, I'll say maybe in a month and a half, probably before Christmas. But we, planning and zoning and permitting are currently reviewing both the building permits, plural, and the grading permit. So those are moving along. Those reviews are moving along. But unfortunately, I do not know the status of the suit. Obviously, the developer behind Providence Point is moving through the review process with the city, grading and building permits at their own risk. But they are, from all I can gather, still 100% moving forward, and it seems like they anticipate a favorable outcome for them. And I don't want to speak for them. That's more of an editorial. So things are moving, but I don't unfortunately have any updates on if and when that appeal will be resolved and the outcome.
Okay, thank you very much. You've answered my questions.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
We need to wrap up.
Just one quick one. On the Eastport Shopping Center, I know there was supposed to be mediation to MDE or the gas station. So that's moving forward.
So another unknown. I too am aware or have heard that there is some sort of MDE involvement because where the mobile gas station was, obviously. I've heard that things are moving, but I have no idea from the applicant at this point where they are in that process.
So just to plant a seed, something I might like to chat with you about at some point is I think it'd be great to have a process or ability for staff, the department, plan and zoning, planning commission, maybe even the council, but to I guess modify a record plat. I don't know the legal implications of that, but my point is to get some of these older projects approved decades ago, utilizing the same old record plat, is to get them to adhere to our new zoning, new comprehensive plan, new standards, et cetera, et cetera. If they keep changing ownership, this Rocky Gorge could be going on for another 10 years for all we know.
Sure.
But there doesn't seem to be a good process for us to reset that. So, again, it's probably more to talk about than this meeting. We don't have much time, but we're offline. Perhaps we can chat about that more.
Yeah, that's a very logical idea, because a subdivision that was, this is an example in the city, subdivision that was created in maybe the 40s or the 50s, now is substandard in many regards. So, I mean, that's exactly what you're suggesting.
Thank you. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Sorry we kept you waiting so long.
This is very helpful to get, because I get questions every week on one project or another. So
You're welcome.
And Ms. Scott, I'm getting the hook here, but do you have any last minute things you really want to let us know before we?
Yes, Jackie Guile, Deputy City Manager for Resilience and Sustainability. First of all, the Resilience and Sustainability Highlights document I gave you is February 2025, not 2024. I seem to be still stuck in last year. But I wanted to let you know that the voucher program for the gas-powered leaf blower ban, I just found out today the Council for the Resilience Authority Board did approve the Resilience Authority to move that project. The Resilience Authority does not have the resources, staff on board to do that themselves, but they will contract with a third party. So they are actively looking into that as of today, how much that would cost, who that might be. And the Resilience Authority would maintain the overall project management and the procurement process for that contract and consultant. And this would be a city and Resilience Authority partnership. And the voucher program, that is, would be a partnership in the way that we implement it. So we'll get started. We're getting started on it as of today. And we know we had planned to have it ready for March, maybe sometime in March.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Guild. And anything else for the good of the order?
Are mics off or on?
Alderman Arnett, your mic is off. We also really need to get the meeting wrapped up.
So we
is there
do
something
ha-
you can talk after offline?
Yeah, we have money for that. The $25,000 was for the design plan, but we have $105,000 allocated for that project in this fiscal year.
Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, there's 2 ayes. The motion carries. Thank you.
Only one more meeting to go today.
Meeting is adjourned.